Welcome to episode 241 of Real Health Radio. You can find the show notes and the links talked about as part of this episode at 7. So the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/241. Before we get started, I want to mention that I've just reopened my practice to new clients. I specialize in helping clients overcome eating disorders and disordered eating, chronic dieting, body dissatisfaction and poor body image, exercise compulsion and over-exercising, and also helping clients regain their period. If you want help in any of these areas or simply want support improving your relationship with food and body and exercise, then please get in contact. You can head over to seven-health.com/help, so HELP, and there you can read about how I work with clients and apply for a free initial chat. So the address again is seven-health.com/help, and I'll also include it in the show notes. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. I'm a nutritionist that specializes in recovery from disordered eating and eating disorders, or really just helping anyone who has a messy relationship with food and body and exercise. And today on the show, it's a guest interview. And my guest today is Ragen Chastain. So Ragen is a speaker, a writer, a multi-certified health and fitness professional, and thought leader in the fields of health at every size and weight stigma, including healthcare and fitness. Utilizing her background in research methods, statistics, and intersectional social justice work, Ragen has brought her signature mix of humor and hard facts to diverse groups, from general audiences to physicians and other health and wellness professionals. She's spoken at conferences from the Diabetes Education Specialists National Conference to the Montana Population Health Summit to the New England New York College Health Association National Conference and more. She's the co-author of the Health at Every Size Health Sheets, weight-neutral healthcare guides for practitioners, patients, and advocates, and the editor of the Praeger anthology, The Politics of Size. Ragen is frequently featured as an expert in print, radio, television, and documentary film. In her free time, she is a national dance champion, a triathlete, a marathoner who holds the Guinness World Record for the heaviest woman to complete a marathon, and co-founder of the Fit Fatties Forum, which has over 10,000 members. And Ragen lives in LA with her partner and her 2 adorable dogs. So this episode is way long overdue. I've known of Ragen for well before I started the podcast and have been a huge fan of her work for years and years. So I'm excited that we finally got to have this chat. And as part of the conversation, we talk about Ragen's background and how she got into writing and speaking about health at every size and weight stigma. We cover her life growing up and the healthy relationship she had with her body and how this then changed, and her time with an eating disorder and then the subsequent years of dieting. She talks about a number of aha moments which led her to then take a different path, one that was in support of her health and her happiness and truly taking care of her body. We cover weight stigma, the different unhealthy activities that we either care to get upset about or we give a pass to. Ragen talks about her experience as a fat dancer and the online trolling that she receives. We talk about weight bias in eating disorder recovery and the problems that this creates, and then also the vague future health threat. And much of the conversation is based around Ragen's book, Fat, the Owner's Manual, and it's a book that I highly recommend you listeners check out, and that's true irrespective of what size body you live in. Like, you definitely will not be disappointed. Towards the end of the conversation, Ragen mentions Novo Nordisk and the co-opting of weight stigma that they have been doing over the last couple of years. And in the moment, I couldn't remember of the name of the guest in which I covered this topic in detail on the podcast before. So I want to add it here. It was with Louise Adams, and it is episode 231. At the end, I'll be back with a couple of recommendations of things to check out. But for now, here is my conversation with Ragen Chastain. Hey, Ragen, welcome to Real Health Radio. I'm so pleased to be chatting with you tonight.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm such a fan of your work, and over the years, you've been referenced on the podcast many times. So it's my error that it's taken this long to actually have you on the show, and I'm super excited to be able to chat with you. And I think what I would like to cover, you have a really wonderful book it's called Fat, the owner's manual, that I loved. And I thought we could use this for much of the conversation. And there's also a keynote that you've done called Size Acceptance and Eating Disorders, a critical, crucial, and core conversation. And a lot of the clients that I work with these days are suffering with eating disorders. And so I'd love to be able to go through some of the information that you cover as part of this talk. But I'd also like to just start by chatting about you, as your own experience is a big part of why you do the work that you do. So I guess let's start from the beginning and when you were younger. Like, what was it like growing up in your household as far as food was concerned?
It was an interesting experience. My dad was a cattle rancher for most of my youth, and sometimes he was the manager and sometimes he was a ranch hand. And so we really waffled back and forth in terms of like the amount of money we had, like sometimes middle class and sometimes quite poor.
Okay.
But always food secure. So very privileged and lucky in that way, but it was an interesting sort of situation. I was always bigger, but I was also a successful athlete. And so I didn't get a ton of body shaming early on. I think I sort of was protected from that by my athletics.
And what, just so I have a sense of like when this was, so how old are you? Just so I can date this.
Sure. I'm 45.
Okay, so I'm 40, so you're 5 years old. I'm just trying to knowing whether, okay, did you have internet at school? Did you have a phone at school? Like all of those experiences, and that's going to be a no for both of those things.
Yeah, I was an Oregon Trail baby. So my first computer that I actually had was my freshman year of college, but my school had a couple computers like toward my sort of junior, senior year, I think.
Okay. And what was your relationship with food like as a kid? So I know you said it would wax and wane from times of feeling more middle class and times of not having as much, but like, how did you relate to food as a kid and then as a teenager?
I feel like I had a pretty good relationship with food. Like I said, we were always food secure. My mom had a really good attitude around feeding us. There wasn't a ton of like food shaming that happened. My dad, less so. My dad was a bit more of a food shamer and that kind of thing, but wasn't as involved in obviously our feeding as my mom was. So I feel like I got to grow up originally with a pretty good relationship with food.
Nice. And then you said like you was quite a sporty kid. So what sports did you play?
We moved around a lot, and so I sort of played whatever was available. So volleyball was a constant. I started playing that in 4th grade. I played soccer. I played softball. I was a cheerleader and a cheerleading captain. I did figure skating when we lived in northern New York because that was like the sport there. I did dance and musical theater. So kind of whatever was around, especially if it had a stage and a spotlight.
Okay. And was that very much like part of your identity growing up? Would you say that like I am the active one or the sporty one or something along those lines?
I was no. So here's the thing. I went to incredibly small rural schools most of my school years. And so in those kind of schools, you don't do just one thing because there's not enough kids. Okay. So you're like in the French club, the Spanish club, choir, field hockey, like whatever. And so music was my focus I started playing clarinet in 4th grade, and I decided pretty early that I wanted to do that professionally. And I pursued that and actually ended up going to college on a scholarship to play clarinet. So music was my main thing, but playing sports was certainly like a big part of my life.
And do you think the fact that you went to those smaller schools meant that you had an easier time in the sports sense? Like if you'd been at a bigger school, you maybe wouldn't have been picked, or you would have had more picking on because of your body or something along those lines. Like I'm just wondering if the size of your school had any impact on you getting away with things that maybe other people didn't.
It may have been. I think about cheerleading. Like, I'm not sure. I was an excellent cheerleader, but I'm not sure that at my size at a bigger school, I would have been supported, because I started cheerleading also in like 5th grade and I was bigger then. And so like to be supported and to become a captain, I'm not sure that would have happened at a bigger school. But yeah, it's a benefit and a curse of a small school that you can do a lot of different things and you can, excel within that smaller stricture. Like I would not have been necessarily at the level that I was considered had I been at a bigger school where there was more competition and more kids.
Yeah, which is then really nice though, because it means you get to hopefully do sport the way that it should be, in terms of it's about having fun and play and all of that, without the same pressures that can then come with a bigger school.
Sort of. So our, different teams were different ways, but like my volleyball team in high school was incredibly competitive, just at the level we competed with other schools our size and slightly bigger. So it's just a little bit different. It's the same, I think, competitive spirit, just on a different scale.
And in terms of like you and dieting, so when did that then come into fruition?
So my junior year of high school, my friend's mom, who I am certain was had the best of intentions, took me aside and said to me, you're going to lose that extra weight in these next couple of years, right? Like, you don't want to go to college fat, do you? And that started a cascade where I hadn't really thought much about losing weight prior to that. And pretty soon I didn't think about much else. And I started eating less and less and exercising more and more. And it actually devolved into an eating disorder just between my senior year of high school and my freshman year of college.
And were you then, as part of that, getting compliments from the outside? Were people really praising you for what you were doing?
Oh, definitely. I got the most praise during the times when I was the sickest and the most involved in harmful behaviors.
And from your parents as well?
So my parents, it wasn't really a huge topic with my parents. It was more like friends and people at the gym, not just praising my body size, but praising my dedication.
Yeah.
I became a fitness instructor. I got certified so that it would make sense that I was at the gym the amount of time that I was, as a cover for my behaviors. And I saw that in other folks too, that was a thing that was fairly common. But yeah, so it was mostly from that crowd.
And how long did it take for you to realize this is a problem, or I don't like where this is now headed?
Well, I collapsed on a treadmill.
Okay.
And got taken to the hospital very briefly. And my recovery is very atypical in that parts of it were very fast. I sort of gained perspective in that small time and was this is not okay. No, this can't go on. This has to stop. So that recovery was really fast, but I started getting treatment, outpatient treatment for my eating disorder. But at the same time, because I was still bigger, even at this time when I had, was deep into this eating disorder as I could be, was hospitalized for collapsing, I was still quote unquote too big. And so I was being told by doctors that I needed to lose weight to be healthy while I was being treated for an eating disorder. Doctors who knew I was in treatment. And I remember one doctor in particular who said, don't go crazy like you did before, but you're just a naturally bigger person. So you're going to have to worry about this the rest of your life.
Which is horrible, horrible advice.
Yeah, absolutely the worst thing. And what I wish I could have heard was, you are a naturally bigger person, right? That's the kernel of truth in that total disaster of it. But I did not hear that at all.
Yeah. And did you have people in the eating disorder team who were either saying, I don't think she really has an eating disorder, I don't think you really have an eating disorder, or anything from that? Or was it the eating disorder team were really kind of had your back, and it was then the doctors who were then giving this other information?
They didn't so much have my back as they wanted me to separate these two things. So they were right now, you need to focus on your recovery. But the idea was once I was recovered and in a better place, then perhaps there would be some ways for me to lose weight to be healthy. So it was never weight loss was off the table. They weren't coming from a health at every size perspective. They were just saying for right now, maybe don't diet since you're 2 minutes out of your full-blown eating disorder.
Wow. Which is, again, just such a horrible message of, okay, you can do this now, but what's waiting for you around the corner is going back to the light version of what you're doing. Exactly.
And it's something much later, Deborah Gard, who's a brilliant therapist and activist in size acceptance and health at every size, said, they prescribe to fat people what we diagnose and treat in thin people.
Yeah.
And that really, when I heard her say that, it really clarified that whole period of time for me and let me really see that for what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is the thing, when I'm working with someone with an eating disorder, I'm very much upfront about I am at no point ever going to say, okay, you need to go back to restriction, or you've had too much now, we need to rein it in, or anything along those lines. Because I think that is such a fear for so many people. And given what you said, it's not just a fear for many people, it becomes a reality of what's advised for many people. And so I am really explicit, like, I don't want to ever be the person that is giving you that message.
Yeah, no, I think that's so important. Like it's unfortunately incredibly common for people who are higher weight and dealing with eating disorders to experience fat phobia in treatment. I was listening to or reading someone talking about they were doing a challenge food with ice cream. And so everyone had to eat 2 scoops of ice cream. And she was told, well, you're going to get a baby scoop. So like literally they were restricting her food by force publicly in a way that was so super clear that she should still restrict because of her size in eating disorder treatment. Like the amount of weight stigma that drives eating disorder treatment for people with higher weight is a huge problem.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what was your diagnosis?
So at the time I was diagnosed, it was the old EDNOS diagnosed, eating disorder not otherwise specified, because I didn't meet the weight requirements for any other diagnosis. You had to be at the time a certain amount, like quote unquote underweight to get specific diagnoses. And I was not quote unquote underweight. And so I was just EDNOS. And
was that the only, like today, do you think they would have given you the diagnosis of anorexia or atypical?
I think they may have given me the diagnosis of atypical anorexia. It was a bit more complicated because of I used both food restriction and compulsive exercise. So I may still be diagnosed, not with a specific diagnosis, but I just remember them telling me, like, you don't meet the weight qualifications to get any other diagnosis.
Yeah, which again is just such a horrible thing, because I work with clients all across the weight spectrum and they're all going through the same stuff. Like it's the same thing. It's not that the person in the high weight body is having an easier experience or that they're binging or any of those like things that people naturally assume.
Yeah. And the idea of atypical anorexia is so upsetting to me, because the only reason it's atypical is because they've ignored anorexia for so long in higher weight people. So it's not atypical. What it is basically is like, they should call it like against our stereotype anorexia. That would be a more honest diagnosis.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so what did your recovery look like then? What were you working like with that eating disorder recovery center? Was that the bulk of it, or what happened after that?
So my treatment was completely outpatient. I was, working with a group therapy situation, and that was fine. But like I said, my recovery mentally was pretty quick and pretty solid, because within probably 6 months of starting treatment, I went on a doctor recommended diet. And I spent years then doing diets, and I had the experience that I later learned almost everybody does, which is I would like lose weight short term and gain it back long term. But I was incredibly lucky not to ever experience a full relapse. So it became sort of enough for my disordered eating brain to like control my food to that extent.
Yeah.
And like to be clear, like, okay, this isn't disordered eating because my doctor prescribed it. Like, this isn't like what I was doing before. And then some of the things that were prescribed were very extreme. In one case, it was a bit less food than I had been eating for a lot of my eating disorder, but I wasn't allowed to exercise on that particular medically supervised program. So it was a process of like allowing my eating disorder brain to keep like being supported within diet culture.
Yeah, which is then really hard because, as you said, like it's getting the seal of approval from a doctor or from someone who should know better in terms of what they're recommending, and to then for you to then say, oh, I don't think I should be doing this, is quite a step. And like you've obviously got there, but it doesn't surprise me that you then ended up back in that place when that's then being recommended from people who have that authority.
Exactly. And you're being told if this isn't working, it's because you're not doing it right. And like, I had an eating disorder. I can measure a quarter cup of rice. Like, I'm doing this right. I'm doing exactly what you're telling me to do. And I'm gaining this weight back. And so it was really frustrating. And that's actually what led me to do the literature review that pulled me out of it, was just this experience I was having where I was like, I'm doing everything right and it's not working. And some doctors would be like, well, you're obviously not trying hard enough, or you need to do more. And my experience with eating disorders at some point stopped me from saying, like, cause like, oh, well, if you're not losing weight, just do more exercise, right? It's this idea of eat less and exercise more as blanket advice, no matter what you're eating or how much you're exercising. And so I think actually having been diagnosed helped me see that as like, no, I'm not going to go down that road. And then some doctors would say, oh, well, yeah, most diets fail, but you just have to find the right one. Right. And so I was like, oh, okay, let's try something else. And I got stuck in that cycle for a long time.
And so what then pulled, you said the literature review. So what happened as part of that experience?
So I got really frustrated and I decided, I had this experience in this medical center where I wanted to quit, and they told me, I couldn't quit. And they were like, well, aren't you tired of hating your body? And I was like, my God, yes. Like, I am exhausted from hating my body. I've been doing it like it's a job, and I haven't gotten any thinner or healthier or happier. So yeah, I am. And I did quit, and I decided I was going to learn to love my body first, and then I was going to lose weight to be healthy. But I decided I was going to separate these two journeys. And so after my process of learning to really love my body and, want to support it and see it as a friend, I decided to lose weight to be healthy. And my background is research methods and statistics. And I was like, I never looked up a single study on any of these diets. So I'm going to do a literature review, and I'm going to figure out the best diet, the one that works the most. And that's what I'm going to do. And so I started reading all of these studies. And at the end of the literature review, I was so shocked by what I found that I went back and I did the whole thing again, because I thought I must have missed something. Because what I found was there was not a single study, not even one, where more than a tiny fraction of people were succeeding at success at long-term significant weight loss. And success was often 5 to 10 pounds, which I could lose 5 pounds right now with a loofah and a haircut. I don't need 2 years of Weight Watchers to make that happen. And so that was what finally pulled me up, because I was like, okay, well, I'm a fan of math and logic and science, and this is obviously not what's right. What is there? And that's what took me to weight neutral interventions.
Okay, which I want to talk about, but you breezed over something there that I think is super important, where you said, the first step was I wanted to learn how to kind of love myself and not hate my body, etc. So that, how did you do that, or what was that path?
So I left that clinic and I sat in my car and I was like, I have no idea how to do this, right? But I'm going to do it, but I don't have the first clue. And so I was trying to think about a place to start, and it hit me out of nowhere that I had spent so much time hating my body for not looking like a Photoshop picture of someone else, that I had not had a second's worth of gratitude for what my body did for me.
Yeah.
And so I drove home and I got out a college ruled notebook and I started writing down every single thing I could think of that my body did for me. And I got granular, breathing and blinking and heartbeat and waist management and then smiling, blinking, waving, everything. And then I became very conscious of my thoughts around my body. And anytime I had a negative thought, I would replace it with the gratitude for something from the list, literally anything. So I could be like, oh, I hate this body part. And then I'd be like, no, I love it. And, and if I couldn't get to a place where I was like, no, I love this body part, I would just be like, oh, thanks for breathing. You're doing a great job breathing. And it sounds hokey, and it probably is hokey, but it really, within a period of probably 3-ish months, fundamentally changed my relationship with my body.
Wow.
And at the time, I did not know that there was a size acceptance or health at every size community out there. It wasn't quite like it is right now with the internet. And so I just wasn't aware. So I was just kind of doing this work on my own, making stuff up. But doing that. And then I started to ask questions about where did I get these ideas about my body? And then hey, wait, who profits off me having these ideas about my body, and getting mad about that? I've always been really kind of social justice minded. I led my first protest in kindergarten. As a queer woman, I had done a ton of queer and trans activism in college. And so that, I had that framework, but I had not yet applied it to body size.
Yeah. And did you, prior to that lady making that comment about, okay, are you going to lose that weight before you head off to college? How would you have said you thought about your body? Was it up until that point you had a pretty good relationship with your body and you'd spoken to it kindly and you'd been fine about the size of your thighs or your arms or whatever, or no, you'd never really had a great relationship with your body?
I definitely was aware that I was like bigger than I quote unquote should be. And every once in a while, like if I had a bad practice or something, a coach would be like, maybe it'd be better if you lost some weight or whatever. But I also like really appreciated my body. And I was pretty successful in my own personal athletic endeavors and with the work I was doing, playing clarinet. And so I would say I had a pretty good relationship with my body. Like I was aware that it was not what people wanted it to be, but I also, and my mom was more like, wait and see, and you never know how tall you're going to get. And 5'3" is the answer to that, by the way. So not that tall. But yeah, so I feel like I had a pretty good relationship with my body.
And so it was for you, rather than starting from the ground up and trying to create something that had never been there before, it was more kind of finding your way back to a place that you had inhabited for quite a while.
Yeah. And really being able to see like, oh, there's been this judgment on my body this whole time. And like, I don't have to participate in that. And
considering you said that there was, at least to your knowledge at the time, there wasn't a size acceptance movement, there wasn't a health at every size, like how easy was it for you to then get your head around that? Because it's one thing to say, like, I shouldn't judge my body, but it might be very difficult for someone hearing that when like the whole world is doing that to them.
Yeah. So what happened was this dance judge. So I started competing in ballroom dance. And I really thought that the judging was going to be about my dancing. I'm not sure how I came to it with that level of naivete, but I was I had a background in dance, and so I was good. I was able, because I was a newcomer to ballroom dance, but not to performance. I was like I got a lot of crowd support because I would like smile and wink and involve them in dancing, and so I really had a great time. And then I had judges say things to me like, what a waste of talent at your size. And things like that. And then after one competition where I was sick, I was done competing. I was trying to get back to my hotel room. I felt like crap. And so I'm carrying all of my like dresses and makeup and shoes. And this judge came like storming at me and like sort of pinned me against an elevator and said, I couldn't stand to look at you.
Wow.
And I had that moment where like, do I go off on this person or I just like let it go? And I was just tired and sick. So I said, okay. And she said, I couldn't stand to look at you. I said, okay. And she put her finger in my face, and her problem with me was that my gown for waltz had spaghetti straps, so my arms were out. And so she put her finger in my face and was like, you have no business wearing spaghetti straps. And I was like, whoa. And she said, I talked to your coach and he said, I could talk to you about this. And I was like, I'm like almost 30. You don't have to ask permission to talk to me. And I said, in truth, I probably won't choose to change the dress, but I appreciate you taking the time to tell me it's such a problem for you. And I don't know where that came from, but she stormed off. And in that moment, I was like, oh, this isn't just a me thing. This is how fat people get treated, and this isn't okay. And so I had this like shift of like, because I was thinking about this entire thing as like a personal journey. Like I had done this literature review I had not talked about it really publicly. I was a business operations consultant at the time. So I was just like, oh, this is my personal journey. I wasn't really envisioning that, look, fat people are a group of people who are systemically oppressed.
Yeah.
Even though I was clear about that for myself as a queer person. And so I was like, I had that moment of like, oh, okay, no, this isn't a me journey. This is like a thing that's happening to fat people. And that is when I started my blog, Dances with Fat. And very embarrassingly, in the first post, again, did not know there was a whole community who had been doing this since long before I was born. And so the posts are very like, I've discovered this thing. It's ridiculous. But yeah, that was that moment. Like I was like, I just wanted to be a fat dancer, but I realized I was going to have to be a fat activist to get that done.
Which is like great that horrible situation then lit a fire within you to then do something about it, and then became a bigger thing than just about you. And that helped. And look, one of the things I often say to clients is the opposite of that, in that like, don't feel that you have to then become an activist for this, because often when someone's in the early stages of recovery, there can then be the feeling of like, and now I've got to take on the whole world. And it's like, you just do you get through this. And if at the end of this, you want to make this your mission and your calling, fine. And if you don't, that is completely okay as well, because I don't want that to then be the thing that gets in the way of someone actually getting to a better place.
Absolutely. And I think like activism speaks to me just because that's kind of who I've always been. And also I have a ton of privilege, right? As a white person, as a cis person, currently neurotypical, currently able-bodied, and on and on and on. And so part of the way I use my privilege is to really engage in activism, to deal with like the trolling and all of that, because the reason that people are activists are so that people don't have to be activists.
Yes.
Right. You shouldn't have to gear up for a doctor's appointment. You shouldn't have to like fear going to any body of water in a swimsuit. You shouldn't have to like engage in activism to live the life you want. And so the reason that I do activism is because hopefully someday, as part of a huge community of people doing this work, other people will never have to do it.
Yeah. And I think that is incredibly admirable. And you have a real skill set with doing this in terms of the way that you're able to write, in terms of the way that you're able to speak. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you are on the front lines doing this.
Thank you so much. I often say I have a dream job that I wish didn't exist, which is to say, like, with the world as it is, this is what I want to be doing. And I'm, again, very privileged and lucky to get to do it. But also I wish that I could just go be like a mediocre stand-up comedian somewhere and like this work wasn't necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe in your twilight years.
Yeah. There's still time to be a mediocre stand-up comic anytime.
Yeah. And so, yeah, let's come back to the second part where you talked about the literature review and the evidence just not really being there for weight loss. And so, yeah, can you talk a little more about that?
Sure. So because the first thing I found out was like, this evidence doesn't support weight loss as any kind of ethical evidence-based intervention for anything. And the second thing I asked was like, well, how did we all get so fooled by this? And so what typically happens is almost everyone can lose weight short-term.
Yeah.
In about 1 to 2 years. Then almost everyone gains it all back long-term, with up to 66% of people gaining back more than they lost. And so what the weight loss industry knew that. In fact, if you go and look at Weight Watchers' original filings, they are clear that they are a repeat business model.
Yeah.
And so what they have done brilliantly is to take advantage of a biological cycle. So your body's first response to food restriction is to lose a little weight short term, but then it's like your body is conditioned to survive. So it's like, I've got you. I'm going to make changes. I'm going to become like a weight regaining, weight maintaining machine. And that's how people gain it back. So what the weight loss industry has done brilliantly is take credit for the first part of that biological response where you have the short-term weight loss, and then blame people and get them to blame themselves for the second part of the biological response where they regain the weight, and then get them to come back to do that cycle again.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, because it can take time to have the weight regain, when people look around, they're able to say, oh, Mary, she's lost weight, and Tom, he's lost weight. And you can see all these people around you who have lost weight, and that then just gets embedded in. It's the equivalent of like going to Vegas and not really understanding that everything is completely stacked against you. And yes, there might be someone who wins big, but it's not actually what happens for the vast, vast majority of people.
Oh my God, I love that metaphor. I'm stealing it with credit, of course. Yeah, and we have this culture where we praise weight loss. And so everybody during their short-term weight loss is like posting all their before and after pictures and their like daily, weigh in and all of this stuff. Nobody posts their weight regain journey, or very few people, right? And so people tend to then withdraw. And what happens is, during this short-term weight loss, what they learn is that every single person they know and some randos on the internet like them better when they're thinner, feel they are a better person when they're thinner. And so the weight regain, it's not just the physical issues that come with weight cycling, and there are many.
Yeah.
Weight loss failure, one of the things that bothers me about this being considered a healthcare intervention is that failure is not benign. Weight cycling or yo-yo dieting is shown to have tremendous negative impacts on the body. But it's not just that physical health component. It's also that psychologically, people are very aware, because they've just been praised roundly by everyone they've ever met for being thinner, that being fatter is not what people like about them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just the whole internalized and externalized stigma about this is from my perspective, what is causing a lot of this kind of health damage that is talked about as being from being overweight.
Yeah, well, and weight stigma itself is shown. So Peter Munich out of Columbia did a series of studies, and he found that, unfortunately, he only looked at cisgender women, but cis women who feel fine about their size have less physical and mental illness than cis women who feel they are too large regardless of their size. And he also found that the stress of constant stigma was correlated with the same health issues to which being fat is correlated. And so stigma itself is a problem, which is something I do a lot of talks to like public health professionals and students, and it's one of the things I talk about. Like, at the very least, interventions that are supposed to increase public health shouldn't decrease public health.
Yeah.
And weight loss messages are inherently from a basis of weight stigma and thus are decreasing public health.
Yeah. Well, there's also great research. I've had Jeffrey Hunger on the podcast before, and him looking at like just so much relating to weight stigma. But there was a great bit of research looking at whether people, like what people think of their own weight and whether they feel that they're in a higher weight body or a low weight body. And actually what matters more isn't the reality of the situation, it's their perception of the situation. And I mean, you talked earlier about people praising people for weight loss. And I that's just such a horrible thing for people with eating disorders, but even for people who are just doing the regular weight loss merry-go-round, because you just don't know what is going on in someone's life. I had a conversation with a client recently, and she was praised for weight loss, and her response was, yeah, my pet just died. And I was like, I'm so glad that you were able to say that to people, because I'm hoping that will then mean that the next time they find themselves in that situation, they'll think better than making a comment.
Yeah. I had a blog reader who had someone tell her, whatever you've been doing looks great on you. And she's like, yeah, stage 4 cancer.
Yeah.
You know, praising weight loss is so dangerous. It's because, like you said, you never know what you're praising. Are you praising grief? Are you praising an active eating disorder? Are you praising, a health issue? But even if a person is actively trying to lose weight, I'm still not going to praise that, because what I know is that 95% or greater chance they're going to gain that weight back. And so whenever somebody's like before and after comes across my Facebook feed, I always say, you look amazing in both pictures. And if you're among the vast majority of people who gain back all their weight, just know that you're valid and worthy at any size. And that is not often taken well by the person or their friends and family who are supporting their current weight loss. But I just want to be one comment that when they gain the weight back, they know one person said, you're valid and worthy at any size. And this is an experience that almost everybody has. It's not your fault.
Yeah. And I think it's great that you're able to make that comment. And I wonder how many people that actually sinks in as a helpful comment.
I hear from people. I really do. Like, I heard from someone an old friend who had been going on a weight loss, attempt. And I had made that comment and reached out to me and said, I gained all the weight back. And, I remember what you said, and I know I blocked you, and I'm sorry. And like, we got back in touch and had a beautiful conversation. But I do hear from people who say, I remember you saying this, and it really is helping me now. And so I keep saying it.
Awesome. That is really nice to hear. And so, yeah, for listeners, please say the same to your friends. One of the things from your book, and this is something I talked about many times before, but I really liked the way that you spoke about it in terms of we pick and choose which unhealthy activities we get upset about people having. And so often, much of this, especially around weight, is about speculation. In terms of like, we speculate that they eat unhealthy food, or we speculate that they do unhealthy things, and yet we know nothing about that, whether it's the truth. And also there are so many other things that we do know that are unhealthy that we just don't pick on people about.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So first of all, I always want to be clear, health and fitness by any definition, these are amorphous concepts. They're not an obligation. They're not a barometer of worthiness. They're not entirely within our control.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. So like in the United States, we've got, American football, and this is an activity that is basically coordinated around the idea of athletes risking their short and long-term physical and mental health in the hopes that they'll like someday score enough points to win like a trophy and a ring.
Yeah.
And this is a $1 billion industry, and people support, they paint their houses the colors of their favorite teams, and this is in other sports as well, rugby, football, or we call it soccer here in the States. But like, this is common. Athletes get this pass, but fat people are told you're not prioritizing your health. So example is fat people being refused knee surgeries. Right. Because they say, oh, well, your lifestyle created this problem, and if you continue to be fat, it won't last as long. As if simply getting someone out of pain isn't good enough. They have to have the exact same, outcome as a thin person to deserve to be out of pain for any amount of time is ridiculous. But like, then you look like a basketball player like Shaquille O'Neal got knee surgery, and he for sure caused his knee injury, and he was going right back to the lifestyle that caused it. But we celebrate that. So there's a real hypocrisy where people use healthism and ableism as a way to sort of try to justify their fat phobia.
Yeah. No, I think that there is total hypocrisy with that. And even if you moved outside of the realm of like health and fitness in terms of people working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks where they don't necessarily need to. I'm not talking about someone who is trying to support a family with like 3 jobs and that kind of thing, but someone who has no need to be doing that can be potentially causing themselves health issues by working in that way. And then they are completely praised for doing that.
Yeah, there's a CEO, I cannot remember for the life of me the name of the company, but he was criticized for how much money he made and how little the company paid to its employees. And he said, well, you don't understand how high stress this job is. I have literally wept at the stress. And like, first of all, the comment on Facebook was like, raise your hand if you've literally wept at a $40,000 a year job or less. And like, everybody's hands would go up, of course. But like, also, this is a person choosing what he is acknowledging as a high stress job, which has health implications. He doesn't have to do that job.
Yeah.
And yet we praise and support people who want to take on high stress jobs. And again, I think people should be allowed to do the job they want. I think they should be well paid no matter what they do. I think everybody should have a thriving wage and paid vacation and an incredible life. So I'm not saying like if somebody wants to be like a high stress lawyer, that's a bad thing. I just really want to point out the ways that there is hypocrisy around people who choose these lifestyles that we know can exacerbate or create health issues, and how that is excused, whereas fat people are constantly blamed no matter what they do.
Yeah. If it's a high stress lawyer who is then in a fat body, then they're going to hear about it. But if it's a high stress lawyer who lives up to our society's standards of what they should look like in inverted commas, then they don't hear anything about it. They're just praised for excelling in life.
Yeah, and it creates a situation where medically, there's a big difference between the kind of care they get, because both of those lawyers, regardless of the size of their body, would likely benefit from information about stress management, right? And ability to take vacation, all of these kind of things. But the fat lawyer will only ever be told to lose weight.
Yeah.
And if they go to the doctor because they're having symptoms of like cardiac issues, they'll be told that weight loss is the only thing that can help them. Their weight will be focused on, whereas the thin lawyer who's having those same symptoms will be given ethical, evidence-based interventions.
Yeah, they'll be told, have they thought about meditation? How much are they sleeping? Those kind of things.
And also like, hey, let's do some scans. Let's get an EKG. Let's get a Holt monitor on and see what that looks like. Whereas the fat person will often be told, well, lose weight.
Yeah.
Without the same diagnostic treatment.
Yeah. Yeah, there was some sections in the book where there was this real juxtaposition between what someone was being told and then the kind of follow-up comment. So it was like, your body makes you unattractive and unhealthy. You should be ashamed of the reflection you see. Now go take care of your body. And I think there was quite a number of these, but I really do think it just sums this up really well in terms of like just the vitriol that people are told and now do something kind and caring about it.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. People don't take care of things they hate. Like if you get a gift and you don't like it, you're not like putting it in a place of prestige and dusting that thing every day, right? And so when we tell people like you are morally bad because of your body is a sign that you're a bad person, that you're lazy, that you're weak-willed, hate your body. And we get that message so much. I did a very unscientific experiment in the early days of my blog where I just counted the number of negative messages that I got about my body in a 24-hour period. And then I extrapolated that to a year. Again, unscientific, but it was like over 360,000 negative messages I would have gotten. It's constant and incessant. And it's very difficult to tell somebody you're worthless and then say, now go treat yourself like you're worthy.
Yeah. And it's also difficult to think those comments have no bearing on someone's health. Like they are just innocuous, and it's got everything to do with what someone's eating and if they're getting enough sleep and if they're moving. Like that receiving those comments from people online or in person, that's not going to have an effect on their health.
Yeah, you can't fat shame somebody for their own good. That's not a thing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I read Aubrey Gordon's book recently, and I think hearing her story, it shows how much weight stigma is really a thing, and how much that can then take a toll on a body.
Yeah. Yeah, it's real. And it's, so you've got your own like sense of self that's being, beaten down every day. And then you've got a system that's stacked against you. So even if you want to engage in health and fitness, you go to a gym and the first thing you see is a big wall of before and after pictures that make it very, very clear that they see you as a project and not as a whole person. You have all, within fitness, within healthcare, there's such a like base of weight stigma. And so trying to like wade through that and have to advocate for every single thing. And then so weight stigma hurts people of all sizes, but it does the most harm to those at the highest weights and those with multiple marginalized identities. And so, let's say you go to a gym and the bench doesn't accommodate you.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't sit down, or the doctor's office, the chair in the waiting room, it has arms and you can't fit in it. You're actively being pushed out of this space and being told you're not welcome. And so like when this is your like day-to-day life, it's very difficult to engage in self-care. And again, people get to put their own priorities and definitions around their health and fitness. What I want is a world where nobody's obligated to participate in these things, but everybody is fully welcomed and included.
Yeah, definitely. And then hearing that as well, though, you understand why people feel the need to diet and why they feel the need to change their body because of the system that we're living. And then that doesn't mean that people should do those things. It doesn't mean that someone can't live in a fat body and have an enjoyable life, but it really does stack the deck that it makes it more likely that someone goes down that path. And that's, just a horrible situation.
Yeah, what I kind of came to was, and I was helped by the fact that I'm queer. And so I never would compare the two directly because all oppressions come from different places and privilege differently. But I came out in the mid 1990s in Texas, which was an interesting time and place to be out. And so at the time, the idea of like conversion therapy, like ex-gay therapy was a thing that people really did, and it still is to this day, but it was like part of sort of mainstream in a way that I don't feel it personally now. But I was very clear. I wasn't going to try to be straight to avoid homophobia.
Yeah.
And so as a fat person, what I came to realize was like weight stigma is real. It does real harm. And I had spent at that time years fighting my own body on behalf of weight stigma, right? Trying to appease my oppressors by changing myself. And what I decided was that instead of doing that, instead of fighting my body on behalf of weight stigma, I was going to start fighting weight stigma on behalf of my body.
Yeah, that is a good reframe there. And when you went online, when you set up your website, did you have any sense of the kind of hate that you would get?
So I actually didn't have a sense that anybody would ever read that blog. I was writing for like 6 people. One of them was my mom. And then the post I did about the, number of negative messages I would get about my body in a year, somebody found that and submitted it to Jezebel, and they republished it. And I got 10,000 visits in one day. And I was sure that was the most people who would ever see what I wrote. But like, I didn't even have a subscribe button. I didn't have a way to contact me. It was just like sitting out there. And so a friend who does SEO was like, you gotta get yourself together here. And Jezebel asked for a follow-up piece. And like, that's kind of how my blog got known. But I also was just not aware of kind of troll culture.
Yeah.
And the way that there were large groups of people who like, they just kind of sat around and harassed people. And so that was a surprise.
And from a like self-care perspective, how do you deal with that? Like, are you just at this stage, it doesn't affect you, or and it did in the early days, or like where are you at with this?
I was always surprising. Again, I think a lot because of the privileges that I have. It was never something that was going to make me stop. and I had done, I had dealt with hatred in the work, in other, civil rights work that I had done. I just, again, wasn't thinking that I hadn't really experienced this kind of online hate where there are, 5,000 people in one day send me horrible messages and emails and stuff. And so I've dealt with it various ways. Sometimes I deal with it with humor. If they're particularly creative, I'll, talk about it and give my pithy commentary. A lot of times I just ignore it. They used to be foolish enough they would all click on anything that I wrote. And that was amazing because I would get huge reader numbers. And so they actually helped me to get a lot of writing opportunities because of the amount of traffic I would get. And at some point, finally, after years, they wised up and now they keep their own archive of my work so that they're only really clicking on things one time. And, but so that was helpful. And mostly I just ignore them. And I try to compassion is hard, but I try to pity. I can't imagine what would have to happen for my life to devolve into being a person like that. And so I, try to work on that. I wrote a piece for a publication called Better Humans about dealing with online trolls. And that was really helpful and cathartic for me too, to be here's kind of what I learned to hopefully help people. And like I said, I have a lot of privilege. And so every second that they spend harassing me is a second they don't spend harassing someone else who may not have the privileges that I have and who may be more harmed by it. And so I, go ahead.
Yeah. I just when I read about some of the stuff that you receive and also that others receive, it is always just who is spending the time doing this? I am always struggling to find time in the day to be able to do all the things that I want to do and to be this is how I'm choosing to spend my time. Yeah, it kind of blows my mind.
Yeah, I call them my there but for the grace of whatever fan club. Because if you spend that kind of time on me, you're a fan. I don't care what you're saying. And it's more like a fan fiction club because there's a lot of writing about me that's there's a grain of truth and then a whole bunch of made up stuff. But yeah, it's interesting. It does. I want to be clear too. It has gotten scary. There have been threats, credible threats. They've shown up to events that I've been at and harassed, me and, taken photographs of my family and friends. It's not all hilarious, but again, I just know that whatever they do that stops me, they're going to do that every time. So if they make a death threat on a speaking event and I don't speak, then they're going to do that every time I have the opportunity to speak. And so I just know I need to keep pushing past that.
Yeah. But it does, just you saying that someone's put a death threat on you speaking just demonstrates how insane this really is. You're talking about how can we give people just unconditional love and acceptance, and how can we give people genuine information about dieting and about weight loss and all of these different things. It is just incredible how much that stirs up in people.
Yeah. And with everything in the world, you look at oppression, racism, poverty, all the things in the world that you could get that kind of excitement about and put that kind of work into.
Yeah.
There's a group that has over 6,000 people online and all they talk about is me. Can you imagine? My mom found them and she was like, I don't know if I should be horrified or impressed. And I was like, yeah, same. But imagine 6,000 people with that kind of time on their hands. Why aren't you working on an atrocity? Why are you coming for me for saying I want people to be able to love themselves and access the world? That is unhinged.
It is. It really is. And so I want to talk about the keynote speech that you do on size acceptance and eating disorders. So are you able to kind of give a little bit of what's included as part of that talk?
Yeah, sure. So that was a talk I gave. I created for Meta and then gave it a number of different places. And so basically what I wanted to look at was the ways that weight stigma is deeply embedded into eating disorder treatment culture. And there's a lot of ways, I had my own experience around that. There's also the culture that surrounds it. So you were telling people to focus on their recovery in a culture that tells them that being thin by any means necessary is completely reasonable.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of that is the way fat people are treated. So going back to the ice cream cone story, when someone in eating disorder treatment sees that if you're fat, you get less ice cream, that is simply going to reinforce their ideas about food restriction.
Yeah.
And when the world is saying don't get fat, when it's reasonable to create a surgery that takes a perfectly healthy stomach and surgically mutilates it to put it into a disease state to force behaviors that mimic eating disorders as a quote unquote treatment for being fat, then those eating disordered behaviors seem pretty reasonable to people.
Yeah.
So there's that piece of it. There's the fact that many people who are involved in eating disorder community have deep-seated weight bias themselves, and you'll hear people say, people who are in treatment will be told, oh, well, we're going to treat your eating disorder, but I promise I won't let you get fat. First of all, that's not a promise you can make. Second of all, let's not reinforce that fat is a bad thing to somebody dealing with an eating disorder. This is incredibly common. And so these things are nuanced and difficult, but we're not navigating them in a way that doesn't reinforce weight stigma and thus reinforce eating disorder behaviors. And so the premise of the talk is that a size acceptance and weight neutral healthcare paradigm are the only paradigms that can actually prevent eating disorders and can create a world where full recovery is much easier than it is now. For some people, full recovery is impossible because of weight stigma and because of our weight-based health paradigm.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you on that. And I do think that within the larger, wider world, okay, there is so much weight stigma and weight bias and all of that, but it shouldn't then be in eating disorder treatment. And the problem that I have so often when working with clients is they've gone to inpatient, outpatient, they've tried so many different things, and it's a real crapshoot of what someone gets when they sign up and when they work with different teams and all that, because so often it is, as you described, it is where there is this real bias in there. It is people giving advice that really they should not be giving to someone with an eating disorder. And we're often, when I hear it, it sounds a lot like the people who are giving out this advice need to do their own work around food and body and their own relationship, because that's how it's then sounding. But when you tell that to someone who's in the depths of an eating disorder, it's just the worst possible thing that can be done.
Yeah. And again, harms people of all sizes, does the most harm to people with eating disorders and higher weight bodies who have a harder time getting diagnosed, who have a harder time being believed, who many times will have their, I know people who literally reached out to their doctor for help and said, I am definitely I have an eating disorder. I'm not okay. And the doctor said, well, why don't you just keep doing what you're doing to get down to your goal weight and then we can address it. And you could die before then. Eating disorders are deadly to people of all sizes. And so that is, to me, the way, that this harm just keeps getting perpetuated. And I absolutely agree that doing your own work piece, there's a part in the talk where I ask people to think about a series of questions and, they tend to feel pretty confident through the first ones, about how do you feel about bodies of all sizes? But then when I ask, how do you feel about if you personally gained a lot of weight? Right. Yeah. That's where you can kind of start to see your own internalized bias. People will say to me, oh, you're, even within eating disorder community, people who are involved in treating eating disorders will say, I mean, you're so brave. I couldn't do it if I were you. And they really honestly believe that's a compliment. Right. If I were your size, I just couldn't do anything. I don't know how you manage is not a compliment. Right. It is an admission to me that you are coming from a place of deep seated fat phobia and you have a lot of work to do. And I've been there. I still, am constantly scanning for internalized fat phobia, but we have to commit to that work.
Yeah. And it can be challenging sometimes having these conversations with clients because I'm a guy who's lived in a thin body for my whole life. I've never struggled with an eating disorder. And so I think sometimes I come up against well, what would you know, how you don't know how it feels type thing. But I do genuinely believe that if my body changed and I was in a larger body, that I would be okay with that. And part of that is because I put so little focus on that part of my life. In that I eat in a way that I enjoy. I do sports and activities that have no bearing on the size or shape of my body. And that's not my focus. I've really tried to make it something that is not so crucial to who I am and my identity and all of those things. And look, I will never know until that happens or if it happens, but I feel like I'm fairly confident in that. And that's kind of the message I'm always wanting to get across to clients of what you weigh is like the least interesting thing about you. Let's find out the things that are interesting about you. Find out the things that you are interested in. Where do you have strengths? All of those things, because that's where we should be putting the focus.
Yeah. And I think it's also really beneficial that you help connect people with people, who are higher weight and who are dealing this work, fat activists and fat people with an eating disorder recovery work, because having that kind of role model is so important. And also having the understanding, like, this isn't just about like a personal experience. It's also about moving in and out of an oppressed group. Totally. And the realities of that. So it's not about like, there's the personal thing of like, okay, if my body changed, how would that affect my day to day? But there's also like, within myself, but there's also like, then how would becoming a member of an oppressed group affect my access to life, affect my ability to do the things? Because one of the things that privilege does is it puts us in a situation where we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Unless we're really doing the work of reaching out, of listening to what people who are, having those experiences are telling us and internalizing that and, understanding that. And that's something that I think like with the podcast and your own work you do and is so important, is to understand like with part of privilege is not knowing. And so I just really appreciate all the work that you do to help get those of us who are, in fat bodies out in front of, different audiences and to be able to talk about this.
Totally. And I'm constantly then recommending books and podcasts and to hear all other people's experiences.
Yeah.
And so in terms of giving this talk, what was the reception when you've given this keynote?
Often, so the first time I gave it at Meta, so Meta is the Multi-Services Eating Disorders Association. It's a national conference, and it's based out of Boston, and they do incredible work and have for a long time and are involved with people like Lisa Dubril, who has been doing this work at a very high level for a very long time. And so they do this national conference, and I gave a workshop, and then they asked me to do a keynote, and it was incredible. It was the first time I've ever gotten 2 standing ovations for the same talk. I got one at the end of the talk and one at the end of the Q&A, which was really incredibly sweet and powerful. The only people who didn't stand were the people who owned eating disorder treatment centers, because I had talked about how unethical it is to own both an eating disorder treatment center and a weight management center.
Yeah.
Where in one building you're prescribing the exact same things that you're treating in the other building, to bring back Deborah Gard's idea. So they were less than pleased. But that's been the reception consistently, is that people who are involved in eating disorder treatment, they get it. They have light bulb moments. They continue to connect with me. I talks that I gave in 2009 where people are still in touch with me about their work. 2009 being when I started doing this. But yeah, so the reception was great. A lot, I'm sure there were people who disagreed, but the feedback I got was incredibly positive. Once I gave it at Meta, I was asked to give that talk a number of other times in different places. So, and I'm just one, I want to point out, of many people who are doing this work, many of whom have been doing it before I was doing it, are doing it with less privilege than I have. And so, my work stands alongside and behind and on their shoulders as well.
Nice. And have you been, like you said that you didn't get the standing ovation from the eating disorder clinics, have you then been, invited in to have more of a personal conversation with any of them? Like, has that happened at all?
In some cases, but not in the cases of the folks who, I've never been invited into an eating disorder treatment center that has both an eating disorder component and a quote unquote weight management component.
Which I guess makes sense given your message, but that's hopefully that they will at some point take it on board and get rid of the weight management wing.
Yeah, and this is this is why it's important that there are a lot of us doing this work in a lot of different ways. There are people who do the work much more subtly than I do, who may be able to get the ear to make incremental changes. I do not do the work subtly. I say it is antithetical to ethics to do this. You cannot ethically have a weight management component of your eating disorders treatment center. Like, you can't sell weight loss and eating disorders treatment at the same time. And so, I'm not surprised that they don't call me, and that's okay. Like, there are other people doing the work, and, we're all doing different parts of the same big work. And so I'm just like doing my little piece of it.
Yeah, and I had the same feeling as you do. A client sent me over the Instagram of someone they were following online and said, "Oh, I really like this person," and I went and checked out their site, and alongside working with eating disorders, they also do weight management. And I was like, this is just, it's just an instant red flag.
Yeah.
I can't see it sort of any other way that if you're offering those two things, there's a problem.
Yeah. I mean, the research is very clear that eating disorders are a much more common outcome than long-term significant weight loss when we're talking about intentional weight loss attempts. So it's simply not ethical. Like there's no way to do that ethically. And I understand people are fooled, and it's, not surprising that they are. There's an entire, board certification around quote unquote obesity medicine that is based around perpetuating interventions that don't have an evidence basis. So I don't think it's people's fault necessarily, but also my first priority has to be the people they're harming and not them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so one of the things I remember from a while ago was that you were getting into doing an Ironman Triathlon. And so I just want to find out where you are with that.
Oh my God. When I say it's been a debacle, it's been a debacle. It was supposed to be like a 2-year journey. And I think with COVID, we're going on like year 8. First of all, it was shockingly difficult to just get the gear and clothing I needed. Like some of it just doesn't exist. So at first I had like a Franken bike where it was just like pieced together to work for my body size, because they just don't make triathlon bikes for my particular body size. Triathlon kits didn't come in my size. Finding a wetsuit was really difficult. So just getting dressed was like a whole other thing. But yeah, so I tried and failed. I DNF'd my first attempt. I've done now some smaller triathlons. And so I'm still on that journey. I've decided rather than doing an Ironman branded triathlon, because there are very strict time limits, and the time limits are what trip me up, not so much the distances. I'm going to just do a non-timed event so I can, because what I wanted to do when I started this, it was part of a greater journey. I got a neck injury and had to walk. And so I decided to do a marathon with my best friend. And then I did a second one because I learned I could get a Guinness World Record. And it became a big part of it was pushing outside of my comfort zone as an athlete. Because I've, like I said, played sports my whole life, but I've only ever done things I was good at right away. I quit track and field in the first 10 seconds because they wanted me to sprint and throw. But then when I got there, they were like, all right, we start every practice with a 2-mile warm-up run. And I was like, see you later. No. And so I was like, I found out about the Ironman Triathlon. I was like, this is like a huge, like I can suck at 3 sports over a really long period of time. And I definitely have gotten my money's worth where that's concerned. But once COVID is over, and I can safely get out, my partner's high risk, so we're being very, very careful about quarantining, but I can get out. I do plan to go back into training for it. And, I want to complete this, and then I want to never do it again. I want to find an indoor sport with air conditioning and comfortable clothes.
Yeah. But here's like another area where you will be congratulated if and when you complete it for something that is unhealthy. Like there is no part of me that thinks doing an Ironman triathlon is healthy by any means. And I would say the same for doing a marathon by any means. And yet we then hold that up and then congratulate someone and say, look what you've done something so good for your fitness and health, etc., when it really isn't.
No, this is something I talk about a lot. So first of all, just to reiterate, fitness, not an obligation, not a barometer of worthiness, not entirely within our control. I've done both. I can tell you for absolute sure that finishing a marathon and having a Netflix marathon are morally equivalent activities. Right? Both a reasonable way to spend a Sunday. And so my thing is, again, that nobody's obligated to participate in fitness, but everybody should be welcome. And if we're talking about health, the research is pretty clear that like 30 minutes-ish, 5 days a week of moderate movement is where the most of the health benefits come from. And so nobody needs to do an Ironman or a marathon for their health. And in fact, you go to a point of diminishing returns and then to a point of doing harm, right? We get a ton of sports injuries that aren't necessary because we don't need to be doing this. So I happen to like to do these kind of fitnessy things with my body, and it's my body. I'm allowed to do that, but it does not make me morally better than anyone else. And it's absolutely not about my health.
Yeah, completely. And yes, you are an adult. You get to choose how you want to spend your time. And if you want to do those things, by all means, do them. But I think it's interesting the way that we then talk about, oh, well, you do lots of marathons, you must be so healthy. And I'm like, I don't necessarily think that is true.
Yeah. And one of the things I try to do is use the platform that doing these fitnessy things gives me to talk about that and to try to make it clear that the way that we treat fitness as if it's some kind of, like I said, barometer of worthiness or morality is really deeply misguided.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember hearing on a podcast something that was interesting in terms of you talking about like getting into cooking in your 30s.
I realized in my 30s that I just didn't really, I obviously could feed myself, but I didn't really know how to cook, right? I had the things that I could make, and a lot of them involved like dissolved sauce packet in boiling water kind of situation, but like I didn't know how to cook. And I got my grandmother's recipes and I decided to kind of cook, through them. And this was pre-blog, right? I wish I could have like blogged about this experience because they were more like remembrances. Like it would be like make a roux. And so now I'm like, what is a roux? But yeah, and so I kind of got into scratch cooking for a while and just like developing that skill. And it became something for me that's really kind of relaxing. And so during the pandemic, actually, we wanted to be so incredibly careful. And we also wanted to save money because obviously I wasn't speaking and our income changed. Luckily, my partner's business kind of continued, but so we were very lucky in that respect. But I just I cooked everything. We ate for 9 months. We didn't order any food out, any prepared food from the grocery store. And I learned how to cook a bunch. We would be like, well, what would we eat if we were going to go out? And then I would learn to cook that. So cooking has become something for me that really is kind of a relaxing, fun pastime.
Nice. That's awesome. Like one upside of the pandemic is that you've been able to really enhance your cooking skills.
Yeah. I hate to say it's an upside because it's so much tragedy, but it's, kind of how I spent the time. My grandma's recipes, I will say the first one I cooked was for her chicken pot pie. And the first line was boil 2 chickens. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like who has a pot that big? First of all, I don't understand this at all. So yeah, it was an interesting experience to cook through. I'm not as much of a scratch cook as, she was, but hopefully I'm doing her legacy proud.
I'm trying to think if I have a pot that is big enough in the kitchen for 2 chickens. And I've got this ginormous pot that I bought at some point for making stock or broth. Mm-hmm. And so I think I could probably just squeeze them in. But yes, that's quite an ask.
Yeah, it was, boil 8 cabbages. I'm like, at once? What is happening in your house, right? Like, were you cooking in an industrial kitchen?
How much freezer space does she have?
A lot. Like, they had their whole basement, I remember. And she had like that huge stand-up. So anyway, this is beside the point, but it was a fun like exploration of what my grandma's life was like.
Yeah. Yeah. And how difficult was it getting into cooking for you? Like, did it feel like you said previously, like with exercise or with other things, like if something was difficult, you just kind of didn't really get involved? Like, was that part of the thing with cooking?
No, because that really only applied to fitnessy stuff.
Okay.
Like, cause I was like, if I'm going to be doing sports, it needs to be a sport cause I'm a hyper competitive person. And so if I wasn't good at a sport right away, like it is not fun for me to struggle at basketball. Like people are like, let's just play for fun. No, it's fun if we win. Like, and I know that's like just my personality. So that was really sports related. Like everything, like I'm happy to struggle and learn other things. Playing clarinet was a huge struggle. I learned piano and some other instruments. So I was ready to struggle and I was ready to fail with cooking, and I did both of those things. But because I really looked at it as kind of an exploration and like building skills. And so like, okay, well, we learned there that won't work. So yeah, it was more of an exploration than it was like I didn't feel pressure.
Okay. And so there was something else in your book that I really liked where you talked about the vague future health threat and this being something that gets pulled out a lot. So do you want to mention what that is?
Sure. So this is the idea of like, and it's a combination of like fatphobia and healthism and ableism. And again, health is a complicated thing to talk about because we do put a moral value on our health. But for a fat person, if they say, I'm healthy or whatever, like I'm following my Hayes weight neutral health journey and I'm happy with where I am, there, people will be like, well, it won't last. Like in the future, you're going to get sick or you're going to, have mobility challenges or whatever. And so this is a thing that gets used a lot as like, so you have to lose weight, right, to avoid this. And it's messed up on a lot of cases. 1, because it's this combination of fatphobia and healthism and ableism. 2, because you're telling somebody to do something that will decrease their health in order to avoid hypothetical future situations. And 3, because these things happen to people of all sizes.
Yeah.
It's just that when you're fat, no matter what, like if a piano being carried by a flock of pelicans got dropped on me, somebody would blame it on me being fat. Like that's just how our culture is. And so it becomes this issue where, thin people get treatment, and not always, obviously there's a lot of privilege and access issues here. But as a general thing, thin people get treatment and fat people get blamed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there was kind of connected to this or just before this in the book talking about like the everybody knows piece, where we just kind of, there's kind of like this common wisdom that's not really wisdom based on what people think is the right answer. And that kind of just gets thrown at people as well of like just, everybody knows this. Exactly.
And this happens at every level. I was recently on the show The Doctors.
I do know that show.
It's a show in the United States. It's like a daytime show, and there's two doctors host, and they bring on guests. And in this case, we were talking about weight neutral health. And I was on there with Dr. Greg Dodell, who's an endocrinologist who practices from a weight neutral perspective. And they had a doctor who came on, Dr. Jampolis, I think, and she is from a weight loss perspective. And so I, at one point, listed a bunch of studies to support what I was saying. And her response was, I'm sure I could find 15 studies that say the opposite. And then they edited out my response. So if you watch the show, you won't see where I was like, actually, I welcome you to try, but you won't. And it's not ethical to treat patients based on what we think we could find if we read the research. But this is a very common thing, that it doesn't matter how much research and how many facts we present. If we think that, everybody knows is a reasonable response to that, which we do when it comes to weight loss, right? Then it's impossible to have like any kind of productive conversation or debate.
I know. And I'm trying to get a sense of this. And it's kind of hard because of the bubble that I live in of like, does it feel like we're turning a tide with this? Like, does it feel like actually people are starting to take weight stigma more seriously, or are starting to take a weight neutral perspective more seriously, or like it's hitting the masses more now than it was, I don't know, 5 years ago? Like, do you have a sense of that?
I do feel like there's change happening. So like I said, I started giving these talks in 2009, and I talked to general audiences, and I also talked to healthcare audiences about the research around best practices for caring for higher weight patients. And I see a real difference in both of those audiences in terms of who was forced to come, who wanted to come, how hostile the Q&A is. Like there's real changes here. And one of the things that is really frightening to me is the way that companies like Novo Nordisk that sell weight loss drugs are co-opting that right now. And so they're doing these like big anti-stigma campaigns, and they just did a big video with a bunch of stars from medical dramas.
Yeah.
With the message that we shouldn't stigmatize fat people, but we should definitely eradicate them from the earth and make sure no others ever exist. And first of all, that's not a non-stigmatizing message. And second of all, it's not driven by care for fat people. It's driven by profit. They have told the press that they are hoping that their new weight loss drug doubles their quote unquote obesity sales. And so this is a huge marketing campaign that is taking all of the work that fat activists have been doing since the 60s and before and co-opting all of it to sell their drug. And it makes me sick. It is so unconscionable. It is so wrong. And it is so just insidious and hard to see if you're outside of this, because people know now, like, okay, weight stigma is a thing, but I've really sorry to kind of hijack the conversation for that, but it is important that we understand that this is happening and that you can't have a message that is anti-weight stigma and pro-weight loss. That doesn't work.
Totally. So I've done a whole podcast episode on this before and talked about it. And I'm blanking on the guest who I was chatting with about it, but I'll put it in the show notes, or I'll put it in the intro when I record it. But yeah, to use the analogy of it's basically like saying like we shouldn't have homophobia so that we can recommend gay conversion therapy.
Right.
It does not make sense to talk about weight stigma from the perspective of then recommending something that is going to change that person's body to make them look less stigmatized or like they shouldn't be stigmatized. Like it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah. That message, I don't want to stigmatize fat people, I just want to eradicate them from the earth, is not actually in any way a non-stigmatizing message.
Yeah. And so, I think that is something that we really need to be wary of. And I'm kind of keeping an eye out for what keeps developing with this, because in other ways, it does feel like things are moving in a better direction. Like in terms of, I'm seeing people talking about anti-diet message and intuitive eating, like popping up on big podcasts that I would never have expected them to be appearing on, and that wouldn't have happened 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And so in some ways it does feel like it's getting better. I've got a client who's just starting as a dietitian, or just started studying, and as part of it, like on day one, they're talking about health at every size. And actually you are linked as part of one of their reading material for the course. And I was like, this is absolutely amazing that this is where they're starting someone out.
Yeah, I don't mean to downplay it. There's been a ton of progress, and it is, I think, getting better, and the word is getting out there, and, there are, more accommodations being made. And so that is all stuff to celebrate. And now it's just about like continuing to do the work moving forward and making sure that we are crediting the people who started it and who continue to do the work. There's, the sort of body positivity thing that happened, where something that was created for radical fat activism kind of got co-opted by chunky white women. And so we have to avoid that happening with the ideas of weight stigma and anti-dieting. Yeah,
I agree. And there was also like a great bit in your book at the end, which is like the "What if I'm wrong" section. And I think this is really useful because this is a conversation I have often with clients. So do you want to kind of explain this?
Sure. So basically, so I come from a background of research methods and statistics, which says that I always have to say, science says we always have to admit I could be wrong. And anyone who isn't willing to admit that isn't somebody that I would take advice from. And so for me, I was like, okay, what if I'm wrong about this, right? What if I actually would live longer if I, kept dieting, or what if that, and I decided, I tried that for years and years, and it was miserable. And so if I'm wrong, I would rather have whatever time I have living the way I'm living now.
Yeah.
Than more years of that.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you on that. And I guess the difficulty I often come up against with this is the more someone is in the depths of an eating disorder, the least amount of awareness they have around these things.
Yeah.
And often the more their life has fallen by the wayside in numerous ways. And so it can be harder to realize that because you have acclimatized to how bad things have become, and that has just become the norm, and you're living at a 1 out of 10, and you don't realize that it's a 1 out of 10. That just feels like this is what life is. And so it becomes a harder message for someone to take on. But what's interesting is the more someone moves along in terms of their recovery, the more that they're able to see how true this is. And they're able to notice like, oh, wow, okay, I can see how much I'm now able to focus, or I can see how much I'm now warmer all the time, or I'm able to sleep through the night, or whatever it may be. Like there's more of these things that start to change that allow someone to see how true a statement that is. But in the beginning, it can be a very difficult thing to wrap their head around.
Yeah. And the more we create a world that says whatever kind of body you recover into, you're going to be able to thrive, and there's no better or worse size body to have. And, dieting is not something to engage in to improve, your life or your body. The more that we have a world like that, the more eating disorders will be prevented, and the more people will be able to access full recovery.
Yeah, totally. Because there is a biological component to an eating disorder, or at least with anorexia, where it's not just driven by a desire to lose weight or anything along those lines. That you can create anorexia in the right kinds of mice or rats, and they are not talking about what their body shape or size looks like. And so there is a biological component to this, but it makes it so much more difficult to deal with that biological component if you're living in a society that praises thin bodies and tells people that they should go on diets and all of these things.
Absolutely. And yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to imply eating disorders are complex biopsychosocial illnesses. And so, yeah, there are a lot of components. I'm just thinking about what kind of world would prevent the most eating disorders and would
totally
make recovery the most possible for those who are dealing with them.
Definitely. And we live in a world that is ramping up the types of activities that people participate in that makes them more likely, if they have the biology, that they're going to fall into that stage.
Yeah.
And getting them to do those things under the guise of looking after their health, or that this is what you need to do to be successful, etc. And so, I'm in complete agreement that the more that we can have a society that cares less about how people look and the shape of their body, and that everyone is accepted, the easier time we're going to have with eating disorders, the less people who are going to find themselves in that position to start with.
Absolutely.
So Ragen, this has been awesome. Is there anything that we haven't gone over or chatted about that you wanted to go through?
Not that I can think of. We've talked about a lot of stuff. This has been thorough, this interview. Thank you.
No, thank you. And look, as I said at the top, you have been I'm a huge fan of your work, and you have been referenced a lot on this podcast. And so I'm glad that we finally got to chat tonight.
I'm really honored by that. And again, so grateful for the work that you're doing, and really grateful to get to be a little part of it today. So thank you very much.
Awesome. And so the final thing is just where should people go if they want to hear more from you, read more from you, where and I'll put all this in the show notes, but yeah, you tell the audience where they should be going.
Sure. So my blog, DancesWithFat, FAT.org, is sort of a home base for all of my work. So from there, you can find all of my social media. You can find past blog posts, other writing. And then I've recently started something called the Weight and Healthcare newsletter on Substack. And that is where I'm writing specifically about the intersections of weight science, weight stigma, and health, including healthcare practice and public health. And so if you're interested in those topics, again, that's weightandhealthcare.substack.com.
Perfect. Well, that I didn't know that, so that I'm glad you mentioned that, and I will go and check that out.
Cool. Yeah, it's something I started recently. I really wanted to write about these topics specifically and have a place where people could go, because my blog covers tons of different topics. And so if somebody just wants to dig into healthcare, then I wanted them to have a space to be able to do that.
Okay, perfect. Well, I recommend that everyone check that out. And thank you so much again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
So that was my conversation with Ragen Chastain. She really is an incredible human being, and I'm so glad that she's out there doing the work that she is. Her book, Fat, the Owner's Manual, is fantastic, and I highly recommend that you check it out. So there are two recommendations that I want to make for things to watch and read. So the first is a film called Licorice Pizza. So I actually took the day off last week on Tuesday, and Ali and I had a date day where we had lunch and we went to the movies. And this is the first time I've been to the movies since the pandemic. And I love going to the movies, and it's something I used to do a lot, and I'm excited about starting to do again more. And we went to a cinema near us called The Everyman, and it has couches in the cinema, and there's tables in the cinema, so you can eat a meal and have a drink in the movie. So it was nice to have some food and a glass of Malbec while watching a daytime movie. And because it was a Tuesday and the middle of the day, Ali and I actually had the whole cinema to ourselves, which was lovely. So Licorice Pizza is the new film by Paul Thomas Anderson, and it's probably been 2 decades since I've seen Punch Drunk Love and Magnolia and Boogie Nights, which were 3 of Anderson's earlier films, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. I remember seeing There Will Be Blood, which was another one of his films, and just didn't get it as a film. And then I hadn't seen his more recent films like The Master and Inherent Vice. But when I watched the trailer for Licorice Pizza, it just looked like an easier and more fun film than his other sort of more recent offerings. And it's set in the 1970s and follows the lives of Alana and Gary, who are 25 and 15 and growing up, and the things that they get up to. And it's very much a coming of age story that's both soft and moving, but also really funny. And it's paced really well. Like, it feels like it's a long film, but not in a bad way. It's actually quite nice. So lots of things happen, but it's at a pace where it feels like the story is like slowly unfolding. And the two leads in the film, for both of them, it's their first films, and they really are incredible. So much of the film and the script feels very natural and almost like improv-like. And to act in this way is actually incredibly difficult. So yeah, the performances that they both give are outstanding. And the whole time I was watching, I was thinking that the male lead just reminded me so much of a young Philip Seymour Hoffman. And then later I found out that it was actually his son, Cooper Hoffman. And then the female lead is Alana Haim, who's one of the sisters from the band Haim. And in fact, all of the Haim sisters and even the Haim parents are in the film. But Alana Haim, the main actress, is definitely going to have a solid film career because she's outstanding. And it has the added bonus of having the film score done by Johnny Greenwood. I'm a huge Radiohead fan, and they've been my favorite band for the last, 25 years or so. And Johnny is the lead guitarist of Radiohead and has now gone into doing musical scores and writing symphonies and basically being phenomenal at whatever type of music he puts his hands to. So I highly recommend checking out the film. It was lovely to look up what was on at the cinema and find something other than a Marvel or a DC or a franchise film. And yeah, I was just not disappointed at all, and it's one of the best films I've seen for a while. So it's called Licorice Pizza. The other recommendation is for a book, and it's called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And this was suggested to me by a friend. He'd heard him interviewed on Sam Harris's Making Sense podcast. It used to be called Waking Up. Sam Harris's Making Sense podcast. And then he'd ordered the book and he'd absolutely loved it. The title, 4,000 Weeks, it refers to the average number of weeks a human being lives. And the subtitle of the book is Time and How We Use It. And on the surface, this could sound like another book about productivity and how we should maximize our efficiency, but it's actually something quite different. And Berkman had actually spent a decade as a productivity geek, to use his own term, and looking at all the various hacks for better managing of one's inbox, or how to get more down or more done, to have more free time, to have more spare time. And he'd actually written about this for about a decade for The Guardian. But what he'd found was that the more he did all of these things and tried to implement Inbox Zero and all of these different hacks, the more he ended up just being more busy and more miserable and feeling like he just wasn't on top of things. And this is something that I have definitely noticed over the many years I've been running my own business. I remember many years ago, before I had a child, I was doing 50 or 60 hour weeks, and many days I'd get up at 4:30 a.m. or 5 a.m. and try and get a head start and get on top of everything I wanted to do. But no matter how much I worked, there was always just more to do, and I never felt any less busy. And so the book really is an exploration of our failed attempts to fit more into our lives and use hacks to get more done. And it feels kind of like a self-help book meets a book on philosophy. And with the core message being about embracing our limits. So rather than pretending like we can fit more and more in, we need to realize that we're only ever going to achieve the tiniest sliver of all available options that are on offer to us as humans. So we should embrace that we have limited time on Earth and limited attention and limited time, and to then spend this more wisely. And this spending it more wisely should include more leisure time, more procrastination, more time with other human beings, more time including things for the sake of it, rather than some benefit that is going to be bestowed on us at some future point in the future. And I can't do the book justice here in trying to describe it, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm using it myself to create more space in my life, to feel less stressed and busy, and to just start to frame things differently. And I am finding it all rather liberating. So the book is called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman, and yeah, I highly recommend checking it out. So that is it for this week's episode. As I mentioned at the top, I've just opened my practice again to new clients. If you want help with an eating disorder or disordered eating, chronic dieting, poor body image, exercise compulsion, getting your period back, or any of the topics that I cover as part of this show, then please reach out. You can head to 7-health.com/help for more information. I'll be back next week with another episode. Take care, and I'll catch you then.